Army came to Taylorsville in 1970. We met 'em at the high school gym one hot July night. A colonel stood upon the stage and told a hated crowd we'd have to leave our bottom land to make way for the dam. And so they dammed the old Salt River where the peaceful waters roll. They raised the water.
Cornelius, 9/16/1944. Well, I'm from Jefferson County. I was born in Jefferson County. I growed up in Linden in Jefferson County, and I come out here in 1979 and started building a house. I've owned land since 1979. We bought a half of a hillside, which consisted of 5 acres from L.G. Davis, and we've been coming and going for the last 40 years. Well, Van Buren, the first time I ever was in Van Buren was in 1965. I had a good friend that bought the Ashby grocery store in Van Buren, and I came up here to see him. I had worked for him in Linden at a gas station. He bought the store, and that was the first time I come up to a little sleeping town sitting down in a valley. It was, you wouldn't believe the size of it. And that was the last time I was in Spencer County till 1979. Just so happened when the lake was coming in, me and the wife decided we would come up here and find some lake property because we like to camp and all, and so we come up here and talked to Miller, this real estate dealer, and he took us over to L.G. Davis's property, and we walked out on the point looking into Van Buren, over Van Buren, and we bought it, not knowing what was all involved. And in the following summer, we started building our house up on overlooking Van Buren town. L.G. Davis, he was a real good neighbor, and he worked down there to Taylorsville as a janitor in the boiler room, and a whole lot of boys that growed up around Taylorsville knew him because he would let them come in the boiler room and smoke. He's dead now, so nobody can do anything about it. But he would tell me, and the boys that I knew would know him, that LG would let them come in the boiler room and smoke. But he had a store down the bottom of the hill there that we overlooked, him and his wife, and he was also a farmer around there. But they had a grocery store, and his wife said people would come from all over. They sold loose candy at the grocery store where you could go in there at Christmas time and buy it by the pound or what you wanted. And she said that people from all around would come and buy it from it. But when the Corps of Engineers come in, they bought all of his land down in the bottom there. And they tore the store down, his house and all of that, and it's all buried down underneath the dirt now. There's no water over it because the lake never did get that high, but the Corps of Engineers wanted all the property up 500 or 600 feet up the hillsides so they could hold the water back on that. Well, I had a good friend, I worked with him at Ligon Platte, Louis McGahee. He's passed now, but I'm thinking he lived on the far end of the Van Buren town, and he wasn't too enthused about having to move out of the old town or anything because they had their own little community down in the town with their banks and their stores, graveyards, and the church and what have you. And he wasn't too enthused about it, but he had to move out and come up there on Brar Ridge. And L.G. Davis, which he was right down there next to Van Buren, and he had a nice house and had a grocery store at the bottom of the hill there, and he had to move up, spend his money to build a new house on top of the hill. So it was one of those things that you got to move with progress, and the flooding was bad anyway, so that's what happened. Now, I don't know about the payments or anything, but they had to get compensated pretty good because they had them forced out. And you know the government, when you deal with them, they're going to get the best of you one way or the other. So it's just one of those things. And I'm hoping that they got enough money to subsidize their new home or where they might have went. Tom Hodge, he owned a gas station in Linden. That's Linden in Jefferson County, Linden, Kentucky. And I worked for him for several years while I was going to high school and all. And that's how I met up with him. And I don't know what he always had a gas station. I don't know why he wanted a grocery store in a small town, but you cannot never tell. The Ashby store, what little I was there, like I said, I was there in the 60s, and I just wandered around. I wasn't but about 23 years old or something, and I was just looking around, amazed at a little town sitting there. We had everything. It was just a big general store, a 2-story building. And I guess you could get everything in there that you needed. And back that time and day, on the store, and that's about all I can remember about the store, what little time I was spent in there. One thing, after he got the grocery store, I come up there and seen him one time and what have you, but his son branched out when they tore the grocery store down. He went to Shelbyville and bought a convenience store in Shelbyville. And he had it till the day he died here 2 or 3 years ago on it. But anyway, Tom Hodge was a real good friend, and I worked for him for several years. It surprised me, even down my wife, they had a bank down there, they had the church, they had the stores, and they had plenty of people that were living down in there, so they were more or less self-sufficient on it. And as far as their water, I guess they all had wells or cisterns because you had the river right behind you there on it. Well, one thing about it, they had a river there they could swim in or fish. And they talk about coon and catfish a lot of times down in the river. I remember that Harold Netherly, that lived over in Cook's Lane, he would tell me about they would be coon and catfish a lot of times in the old river and what have you. My grandfather was on the census back in the 1800s, William Cornelius, and you've got a David Cornelius that owned the log cabin that's up there on the Corps of Engineers property, and I tried to find some literature about him in here, but I couldn't find nothing. But they said he owned that one, but Cornelius come out of Washington County, some of them, but my grandfather, William Cornelius, he was here as a farmer when he was a kid. He was just more or less a tenant farmer, as far as I know, all that, and on here, he probably fooled the tobacco and what have you like that when he was a kid and lived around here. There was a log cabin that belonged to the Mr. Netherly, and his son was Mike Netherly. The log cabin set down on the river. Mr. Netherly owned a whole lot of the river bottom, and I guess when they started to flood it, he wanted to move the cabin up on the hill, and Mr. Netherly told us that Jesse James had stayed in that log cabin now. I don't know what it's worth, but anyway, Mike, his son, told me it had been handed down through the family that Jesse James had stayed in that log cabin, so Mr. Netherly had bulldozers and pulled it up on the hill away from the river, and that's where it sat until the day it was burnt down. Some kids were back there. It was all set up. He had electric and all in the log cabin. It had a big, nice fireplace in there, and there were some kids go back there, and you know what kids do, hop around and this and that. So I guess it was cold, and they built a fire in the fireplace, and the fireplace wasn't really set up to burn, and they left, and I guess it caught the house on fire, and way back in the woods there's no way to put the fire out, so the log cabin was burnt to the ground. You come down in Van Buren off of Crooked Creek Road, come into Van Buren, and you went about halfway through the town, and you could make a right, and there was a big iron bridge that went across Salt River, and you went back up the hillsides towards the other Chowning's Lane and what have you. It circled up through there, but there was a big iron bridge there, and when the Corps of Engineers come in, they tore it all down, and the concrete off of it. They piled it up in the lake and made it as a fish attraction. The Corps cleared out everything up and down the lake there that was standing up that it wouldn't cover up. They would bury it or burn it up, one of the two, when they come up through there. So that's what happened to the old Iron Bridge. But you had another Iron Bridge over here at the state boat dock where Briar Ridge Road come down the hill. That was another Iron Bridge that we would use a lot getting to our property at one time. Van Buren was completely like somebody had plowed a field, was going to plant corn. When the Corps of Engineers got done, anything standing would float or anything like that, they would burn it up or bury it to where it wouldn't come up. And even down some of the concrete foundations of the houses, they dug holes and buried them down there too, so the boats wouldn't run into it. But anything they left, a fish attraction, they would put a buoy on it to know where it was. But everything, when they got done, Van Buren wasn't up with a big field down through there. The flood control, it was a great problem. Taylorsville itself was a big flood problem. They built the dikes around Taylorsville here, and down Salt River, West Point, what have you, would get flooded out. But my own thing with it, when we were building up here, the Briar Ridge Road that went down by the state dock, down in the lake, at times we couldn't even get out that road because it would be flooded, and I waited on the concrete trucks. It didn't take much to get over the road down there in that bottom where the boat ramp is to get up there and the flood water, so it didn't take long at all. That was one main thing to stop the flooding on down the river. The flooding itself, I don't believe it took over a week or two. We had went before when they had the dam up and set, and we drove down in there at the bottom of the dam, and a normal thing, you could have took a 5-gallon bucket or something and dipped the water out that was running through the dam. And I figured, well, it'd take several months or a year to fill the lake up, but just so happened they hit a rainy season. Within a week or two, the lake was pretty well filled up. And originally, Van Buren had about 10 feet of water standing in it when they flooded the lake. Crooked Creek comes all the way down through there, and along the road, well, you got Crooked Creek Road that led into Van Buren, and Crooked Creek run into the Salt River right at Van Buren. So Van Buren is sitting on Salt River on the south, and the east or the west was Crooked Creek that run into it, and that's the two sources of the water that was around Van Buren. Well, Crooked Creek, about a half a mile back up Crooked Creek or so, this creek is still there. It was just a matter of Corps of Engineers bringing the river up, and originally Crooked Creek in front of us down the hill there had about 4 foot of water in the creek, and we could bring our boats up in the creek. And as the lake got older and older, the mud got washing in to where it filled it back in. You didn't have a foot of water or something standing down there, and that was the end of Crooked Creek at Salt River. Before it run in there. The hillsides, when the Corps of Engineers finally shut it down, they told us we couldn't mow it. They gave us about 100 feet of mowing around the front of the house for a fire break, but you could go down the lake and you could see a whole lot of cedar trees growing up on a hillside, and that's generally where they had a crop or something at one time before they flooded the lake, because a lot of people grow their tobacco on the side of the hillsides, and that took out. Now it's all grown up, and there's nothing. These hillsides, you don't farm them much anymore. And also down at the end of Cooks's Lane, Harold Medley lived there, and he told me down on the river, he had property down on the river, and they had a big footbridge that went all the way across the river there. When the river would flood, you could take that footbridge and go on the other side of the river at the end of Cooks's Lane. Anytime I talk about a river, it's always a salt river. And another thing, when we were building up there, me and the wife and son, we would go up there and build. It would be hotter than heck, and sometimes we'd just go down into the creek down there at Crooked Creek and just lay down there like a bunch of dogs cooling off, and you might have to run the snakes out of the way before you could go swimming in the creek or getting in the creek. And we would carry our water up for our concrete and all out of Crooked Creek. When you come into Van Buren, if you made a right, that was Salt River Road. Salt River Road run down around, stayed with the river and run down all the way. You could go all the way down to Cooks' Lane and back up the hill and make a circle around through there. And the old truck, any place you want to ride in it, you could go, and we would ride that truck around just to cool off at times. The roads that were down in Van Buren, the Crooked Creek Road, they just dead end it when all the way up to Corps of Engineers property. It was probably maybe a mile before you got into Van Buren. The Corps blocked the road off, and the other road that comes down the hill over to at the boat ramp, they built a boat ramp there. And an old Salt River Road that run along the hillsides, it was an old gravel road, and they just covered it up. They just flooded it. But the blacktop and all of it was in Van Buren. They just tore it up. And the road that went across the Arn Bridge about middle ways of Van Buren, they just did away with it and left the gravel there. But there were several roads you could go up and down through there where roads had come down the hill into the old Salt River Road, and they just blocked them off. And because the Corps will not let no motor vehicles on there. You can ride horses or walk, but no motorcycles or nothing like that. All I know it was a nice town, and I hate to see it go, but progress has got to move on, and they really needed the flood control to stop from the flooding of the rest of it. It made a good by giving away the little town down there, or what have you. At least it made a recreation for a whole lot of people, and I hope brought a whole lot of money into Spencer County by having to give up the old Van Buren town. You better enjoy every day that you live, because you never know when the day is going to be over.
Pilgrim, and I am not wanted here. Well, I walk the same roads you do, and you do not find me there. Oh, I haul a heavy burden, I haul it everywhere. Oh, I am a pilgrim, and I seek what is not there. Oh, I seek what is not there.